So are you
Actually, I want to talk to you a little bit after because maybe you can help me out a little bit with that part. But the idea is that no, not really. We want you to try to implement a specific design, but maybe you can help me out with some of that because we need to turn this wireframe into a proper design. So, and it takes quite a lot of time. I don't know if I can do it detailed enough.
I can do some.
Yeah, that would be nice.
These are US guy. You are US guy.
I know, so that's good.
So this is on the GitHub.
Hyper CPH.
Yeah. The Amsterdam one is called Hyper, so I just used that name.
It's a good name. Hyper. Hyper.
Looks like your this.
We can have a discussion about the name as well, but let's do that over the Christmas lunch. So we can have a discussion about the name, but let's do it over the Christmas lunch, so we don't spend class time on that.
Yeah. That's great.
Very minimalistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do it.
It's weird.
There are lots of
You okay?
She was like, we were talking about like in the show.
Don't die before you pay. You're fine.
So you also have to on
We were talking about like in this class, every like class of them has computer science and we yeah. The only girls in this class, we are all come from non-CS background.
You'll be alright. You'll be alright.
I know. It's also bragging, not to get empathy. Okay?
no, gold step like
Empathy
really
is
high
nice.
numbers. Like there is like a boy and girls computing and girls will get something.
No, it depends. Like what's your
No.
skills and everything.
Okay. So maybe I'll just ask you, looking at the wireframes here, what do you think we might have to research before? Yeah?
Authentication.
Authentication, yes, that's a good one.
Who? You are in charge of authentication?
No, just not saying that yet. I'm asking you, what do you think? Please, quiet. What do you think we need to research in order to be able to build this application?
Calendar.
Sending mails and receiving answers.
Sending and receiving emails?
Calendar API.
Calendar?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
What did you say?
The API, how to send the calendar to Google API or Google Calendar from Microsoft.
Search?
Elasticsearch.
I discussed that a little bit before that we probably don't need Elasticsearch. But there is a risk. Maybe
we still need something like when you type a word and it has
Autocomplete.
yeah, we do. Yeah. So autocomplete, yeah, that is actually that was actually a topic I thought about a little bit as well. I just kind of forgot it. Cool.
I mean, if everyone is not clear on it, CRUD, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to get that data. It doesn't do.
Absolutely. Cool. So you're mostly mentioning the same things that we decided as research friends. So that's good. Maybe I should just not have prepared at all today. I should just like ask you, what do you think we should research, and then we'll review. All good. Let's have a look. So that was actually the secret part. I was just who we had assigned to what, but you'll know in a minute. Okay, so no, it's not. It's fine. So this is the individual tasks that we decided we wanted to have a look at. So the first one is integration with the Google Calendar. So we want you to figure out how to write to a Google Calendar, how to read to a Google Calendar, And then there's this thing about like sending out invitees and figuring out whether the user has accepted that invitee and stuff like that. You need to figure out how can we pull data out of the Google Calendar API to know that that has happened. And we added a resources. That's like where to start doing your research. Of course, you should not limit yourself to that. You should do all the search you can imagine. And now we made this like numbered bullets, but I'm actually going to jump straight to the last one, because this is kind of like a little bit of what I would call like competitive analysis. Like we have like two different ideas in play right now. So there's the Google Calendar idea, but then Google is actually making a product that's called Google Classroom. And Google Classroom is mostly designed for schools where you want to have like a system for organizing, handing in homework. That's something we definitely need a lot as well, but it's not really within the scope of this product. Maybe it can be so in the future. But the interesting thing is that Google Classroom provides like constructs for building classes, adding students, having teachers, and there's also some flows for onboarding new students, so it will send out emails that you've been invited to this class, and so on, so on, so on. So we actually want someone to try to sit down with Google Classroom, figure out exactly what can it do, what does it not do, can we pull data out of the API, will the data that we can store in Google Classroom, will that be sufficient to support the stuff that we've drawn here? Will we be able to store the data about teachers that we need? Will we be able to store the data about students that we need? Can we have all of those things, or will we end up having to build all this in our own local application anyway? So the question is actually whether we need to have a database with students and students, teachers, and classes, or we can take all of that out of our database and just say, put that in Google Classroom. Because Google Classroom has a really nice UI for adding all of these kind of things. You know, it's like a Google product. It works really nice, but it's not really designed for what we're doing. So we want to figure out how far can we get just using Google Classroom. That's the second task. So one guy or girl is exploring Google Calendar. So we definitely need to have some sort of integration with Calendar, and I don't think we want to take care of sending calendar invitees and sending out calendar events to put into your calendar. Then we have to like write all of that ourselves. If we can just do it through the Google Calendar API, because that would be like the third option would be to do everything yourself. And Abdullah mentioned like sending emails and stuff like that. I actually didn't even think about that, but I don't think we'll need it, because I think we'll actually be using APIs for all the kind of stuff that we need to send emails to users. So that's, but maybe we'll come back in a week, or hopefully already like in 3-4 days, and we'll figure out, okay, so maybe the Google Classroom idea that flunked completely, it didn't work out, so we can't do it. And maybe the Google Calendar is way too complicated. We figure out we need to do something ourselves. Then we have to do another research spike on that. But I hope we can go with one of these two solutions. And maybe stick to the stuff that's related to this, because there's another one where someone has to explore how we can export stuff to your calendar. So I think that's also, I mean, as I understand it, the Google Classroom will export to a Google Calendar, and then you can get that Google Calendar into your phone. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome.
Someone has to sit down and make sure that we can export these things to the calendar, and we want to make sure that the stuff that we export to the calendar is dynamic. Because I looked a little bit into it, and I didn't like read everything about exporting to calendars and stuff like that. But as far as I can understand it, there's like some different things in play. So there's the iCalendar format, which is a format that you can use to export a calendar. But if I understand it correctly, that format seems to be static. So it's just like a list of events, calendar events. And if we change a calendar event on the server, nothing's going to happen, because the user will have to go and export the iCalendar once again. But there's something else called CalDAV, and if I understand it correctly, CalDAV is designed to be able to look at the server and fetch events dynamically. And that's something like that we need, but I don't really know how these things play together. So we need to have someone research this stuff, figure out how can we get a dynamic updated calendar down into people's phones in their pockets, and that calendar should be controlled from the data that we have in our application. Yeah, and then we have then we still have like the CRUD task, but we're not going to assign anyone to the CRUD one because we did that last week. So then there is the authentication. Yay! We probably need to use OAuth authentication. What we want to do is we want to have this thing where you go on an application and says register, and then you have like register with Facebook, register with Google or GitHub or Slack or something like that. That's the type of authentication we want to build. And here I wrote GitHub. And this morning I've been researching things, and I'm not sure if it should be GitHub or it should be Google or it should be maybe Slack
Or all of them.
or maybe all of them. We had this idea initially that we wanted to make it GitHub because that forces students to actually have a GitHub profile. And it's been such a struggle just to collect all people's GitHub profiles in the past. So it would be nice if they just sign up in here and they use the GitHub profile, and then we know what the GitHub profile is. But then I realized if we're using a lot of Google services, then we might have like a shortcut in terms of like getting access to the personal calendar and being able to write things to the calendar by using the Google authentication. But I'm not completely sure how this works. And same thing, because we're also talking about having some sort of Slack integration. So using the Slack to authenticate could also be beneficial here. Although I'm pretty sure that we can definitely find a way to write to Slack without having the user sign into his individual Slack. So
I was thinking you could also just, if you could, maybe have something that added more profiles later, right? If you like could sign up. With,
yeah, so
let's say, GitHub
so that's actually the point, and I don't know if I managed to write this yet. No, I'm just going to add a comment here. Because we need you to use something that's called Passport.js. And Passport.js, you know it already?
Yeah.
Okay, can you explain what it is?
I mean, it's kind of an overall authentication app kind of thing where you can either register and have information locally, right, on a server or something somewhere, or it's kind of a middleware between your application and the Google authentication service, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't redirect you, but you give it your information somehow, and then it sends it off to Google and asks, "Is this right?" And then Google.
Yeah, now you're actually explaining what OAuth is about. But what Passport does is it just makes it fairly easy to replace one authentication system with another one. So you can either do local authentication like the old school way, you have to type your email and come up with a password, or you can do GitHub authentication or Google or Facebook or different things. And I'm still not completely settled if we should have like local authentication or we should just delegate all of this to one provider, Google maybe, or maybe two providers, Google and GitHub. Or
I think we should not give chance for Joe here to have a learning experience.
Yeah. So, but that's actually the point. I want someone to research this and come back and tell me, I researched this. I can tell you we need to use Google OAuth authentication because that enables us to write directly to the Google Calendar. Or maybe this guy or girl comes back and says, actually we can use anything because it's easy. You just have to do like this and this, that, and we can do everything. Or come back and say, yeah, so actually, maybe even like, yeah, so I actually had a long discussion with Christopher. And based on the needs that we have in the organization, that we need to enforce that everyone has a Slack account. We need to make it Slack access, something like that. That could also be something. So there's some different things when you research this stuff. You need to think about the business requirements. What does the organization actually need? Do we want to enforce something? Or do we just want to keep it completely open? Because then that's easier to get everyone in there. And maybe there are some security conscious developer types. I know there's definitely developer types here, right? Some security conscious people who don't want to expose their Google account, or maybe don't have a Facebook account. They shut down their Facebook account or something like that. I could imagine it's a bad idea to only provide Facebook authentication for this one, because I'm pretty sure some of the mentors have shut down their Facebook, even students maybe, shut down their Facebook account for privacy concerns or something like that.
So here's the question. So we envision Joe spearheading this authentication.
Yeah, now you're like revealing who's doing what, but yeah, we actually gave it to you. And I think, was there another one on that one? But I'll tell you in a minute exactly who's doing what. So that's the authentication. And then just a quick question: does anyone know what the difference is between authentication and authorization?
Don't know the no.
Do you know it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you explain it to me?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm trying. Authentication is checking if you are you.
Yeah.
Where authorization is checking what kind of rights you have.
Exactly. That's very accurate.
Precisely.
And it's so common that people, even like experienced developers, confuse these things, and for that reason it's absolutely forgivable if you thought that authorization was authentication or the other way around, because people very often use them in a very relaxed way. But really, the definition is authentication is figuring out that you're you, and also figuring out like the security aspect of it, making sure that there's not like a man in the middle or anything like that. It's just making sure that you're you, and that's for sure. And authorization is related more to what can you, now we know that you're you, what are you allowed to do in the application? Yeah. And as you've probably already seen based on the wireframes that I gave you, there will be quite a bit of this thing where you need to assign different rights and stuff like that. And so far with the final project, the last final project there was a little bit of authentication, but they only had like a single admin role in there. It's not like different levels, but here we actually do need different levels. Yeah.
Would we want to make that dynamic with roles? We know we need like the administrative, like that won't change, but would we want to be able to add more later, possibly? Or
yeah, I believe we will be able to.
Mentor student.
I believe you will have to be able to add roles later. I don't think we should make a UI to add roles. It's more like we can go in the database and then we can see, okay, now there's a new role, and then we can go and assign that role to different views. So this view is only.
So you can add you have later. Just have one. Cool.
Yes, that's maybe something to add here, because the point is that I actually split this out. So when you're doing authentication, you're actually not supposed to deal with authorization, because someone else is doing authorization. But of course that means that the person doing authentication and the person doing authorization will probably have to talk a little bit together and make sure that they build something that can talk together. Yeah, so this is the next task, that's authorization. So that's about figuring out how to make sure that some people can do something, other people can do something else. And when you're doing this task, you probably have to kind of like hard code a role. So this is an administrator role, and then you go and set up all the stuff that's needed for an administrator role. This is a student role, and then you go and do all that stuff. And then when you put that together with the authentication part, the roles will be dynamic. So whenever it's an administrator that's logged in, he will have the ability to see the things that are related to an administrator. Yeah. Cool. And the next task is to try to research some calendar components for React. So we have this view out here that is like sort of a calendar and sort of not a calendar. It's kind of a week calendar, and we want to be able to put in data like this. It's kind of like a gridded view where you can put multiple things and multiple tracks under each other. We need to figure out a way to build that, and I think you can easily spend a lot of time building this yourself. It's probably a good idea to try and have a look at the modules that are out there. We did find a module for you to start researching that I think looks a lot like what we want. And I mean, we are definitely open to adjusting the UI. If we can find a component that works really well for our purpose, we'll adjust the UI so it works with that component, at least to some degree. We'll have to think about like about the requirements. We're still fulfilling the requirements. But I mean, if you have to build something like that and it's pretty complicated and you have to maintain it and then we hand it off to the next project and then they have to fix a bug that's something really weird and someone here created some real spaghetti because you had to do something that's maybe more complicated than what they're used to. So in those kind of cases, it's usually a pretty good idea to try to have a look at what's available out there. I don't know if this component is actually the answer to that question. But it's definitely a place to start, and I try to formulate some requirements for that. So there's something about like a grid-like layout, and it should be able to show it based on weeks, and maybe I should add some more requirements in there. I'm not sure. Yeah. Then the next task is to try to make your Express server interact with Slack. So we have a few different ideas here. One idea is that you're a mentor. You've just been assigned to teach a module. You get a Slack notification. Another idea is that maybe I think this is something that you should individually be able to choose or not choose. But I mean, I could imagine maybe there's some students or mentors for that sake who struggle to get up in the morning before classes on a Sunday. So maybe at 10 a.m. it will send you a Slack notification that's like, yeah, remember you have class today. Today the class is at KP8 in this room, maybe something like that. And you just get like a Slack message in the morning. Something like that.
Like a reminder.
Huh?
A reminder.
A reminder, exactly, yeah. Another idea that I have, because we have like the idea to include events. So I thought of a way to do it the other way around, so you can maybe do something from Slack that interacts with our application. So my idea was that you can go in and I think I explained it here. Yeah. So I actually gave the task to try to write something where you can use Slack to trigger a function on your server. This is just a really basic function where you will type in Slack, you will type /echo in the general Slack channel. We're going to set up a test Slack for you so we don't get like spammed in the real Slack. But you just like type /echo, and then a function will be triggered on the server, and that function will go and have a look at who are you authenticated as in Slack, what's your username on Slack, and then the function will post back hello and then your name. It's just kind of like a hello world application where you can trigger something from Slack. What I'm thinking about building for the final application with this is quite often we have like people sitting on Slack and they're like, oh, so maybe mentors discussing with a student. This thing was really difficult to figure out during class, and then they figure out, okay, so maybe let's do like a little homework session. Let's do a homework session at the Sorte Diamant, the library. Are you free on Tuesday? And yeah, I'm free on Tuesday, and maybe someone else will join. And then we can, from the Slack channel, you can maybe post something like /event space homework session at Sorte Diamant, Tuesday 16 or 4 p.m. or something like that. And that would automatically go and create an event inside our application and push that to a Google Calendar. So people can see that in their Google Calendar. There's a homework session event going on, and all you ever had to do was just to type in a little command in Slack. Like command line magic. But this is a little bit of a stretch goal. I mean, in general, the Slack integration, think that's the first thing we're going to try to implement here. But it's something that's really interesting, and I hope whoever get this one as a research task will see it as a really cool opportunity, because I also think that something like this is like, if you go out in an internship in a big company and maybe they're a little bit uneasy just like having you bang away at the database and like open up everything to you, they want to see you be able to do something. So a really cool task for an intern is like, maybe you can make a Slack bot for us. Maybe you can make something that will post on Slack whenever we deploy something or something like that. I think that's really realistic. So I think there's a cool learning opportunity here. And if we can implement it into the final application, that would be awesome. If we don't manage to do it, it's all right. We'll maybe do it with one of the following classes. And we did the number 7, we discussed that one, and number 8, we discussed that one. Okay, so the big reveal, who's doing what? Yeah. So Abdullah, you're doing task number 4. That was authorization. And it's really good that you know the difference. So, and Mohammed Ashishul, is that correct? Yeah. You're doing the same one. So, I mean, as I explained, you're doing it individually, so you both have individual responsibility of handing in a prototype that can show that we can do this. But of course, you should talk together how to do it, or give each other some tips and discuss what to do. So Joe, you're tasked with the authentication. And we did that one. Shishan?
Marco's not here.
Yeah, Marco is not here? Where's Marco? He's way down there. Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, see, okay, so there are 2 people on this one as well. Yeah. So Joe is doing this one, and Marco is doing it as well, and we'll give him notice. Shishan is doing number 7. So that is about figuring out how to integrate Google with, or the calendar with I lost. Oh, the calendar in our application with Google Calendar, and ideally also Outlook or whatever. Try to figure out what can we do. It's not so much about like just like getting one of them down, but maybe if you're building a prototype and you realize you have to implement something different for everything, don't do that. Focus on Google. But if you figure out that it's actually pretty easy to support also Outlook and whatever, definitely make sure to include that. Sawyer?
Yeah.
Doing number 5.
Number 6 or number 5?
Was that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
5.
Oh yeah, and Krishna is doing number 5 as well. Yep. So that's the React calendar component. So I just explained that. Have a look at the component that we found. Maybe figure out if you can find a better component for the purpose. Figure out if you can get this to actually show the stuff that I'm doing in the wireframes. Yeah.
So we have to search for the most suitable component.
Yeah, start out with the one that I'm suggesting there, but also try to find some alternatives. See if there's something that's better out there. Maybe there's a really interesting note about finding components. So if you want to include a library, an npm package, or something like that, have anyone like tried having to, what's it called in English? Vet, kind of like figure out which components is best. What would you look for if you have to figure out which components is best?
Search.
Find some components first. Yeah. So let's imagine you have 5 different. Let's just say 2 different components. You have to figure out which one is best. What will you?
I usually just use Code Sandbox and then directly import that library and directly build something like simple and compare it.
So you try it out. Yeah. That's a really good idea.
First, I would see what do I need, what do these offer.
Yes. So definitely a good idea to try to read through the documentation here and figure out does it actually do what I need? Because I mean, if you start implementing and figure out it doesn't do it, then it's like wasted time. But I definitely expect you to have built a prototype where you're using this so we can see that it works. It's not enough just to go through the documentation and be like, yeah, I can see an example where it does this and this and that. I want you to try it out. Then another thing is that what I would look for is last publish. If this one says 6 years ago, it's not maintained. Someone built this and just left it. It might be all right if it's a really simple library and it just means that it's finished. I mean, in some cases you have code that's so simple that it almost don't need any maintenance, but that's really, really rare. And something like this is definitely complicated enough that you want to make sure that there's a maintainer doing something active in there. The other thing to look for is here, open issues. So it's always really difficult to figure out how many issues is many and how much. So you have to kind of like compare it a little bit with the weekly downloads. So how many users are using it? How many issues are there? A good idea is also to go on the GitHub profile, and then you can go on the issues here. And you can have a look at some of the issues, and you can try to determine, is this like really critical issues? Sometimes there's an issue that this doesn't work with NPM version 6 and up or something like that. And if you're using a newer version than that, you might be in trouble, right? Another thing is also to go in and have a look at some of the issues and be like, okay, so there's a bug here, and it was created on the 13th of October. How does the maintainer of the repository respond? Does he even respond? Sometimes there's just a ton of bugs and nobody's looking at them. And here the maintainer is saying this will be fixed in 391. And he responded 21st of October, 13th of October. So within about a week, he responded that there's a fix coming out. That's pretty good. But if there's like months and months and months and they're not like reading all the bugs and stuff like that, that's like a sign that there is a maintainer, but he's probably more busy doing his day job than doing open source. So those things are things to look out for, and I mean, for me, it's difficult to figure out whether this one is better maintained than this one. So obviously for you, it would probably be even harder, but now I showed you some ways that you can at least make a little more of a qualified decision. And I mean, that goes for every one of you, because even if you're not tasked with this React component thing, you might need to use an NPM package, a library, something like that. So every time you're including something new, think about these things. Yeah. How far did I get now? So it was like, yeah. So Ibrahim is task number 6. So that's the Slack integration part.
And Mohammed Musi.
Oh, there's 2 of them on. Okay, yeah, cool. Sorry. Yeah, cool.
So it's Ibrahim and Musi with Slack, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just basically being able from our application to post something on a Slack channel, and the other way around, being able to type a little command in the Slack channel and trigger a function in our application. And it's described here in the acceptance criteria. We set up a separate Slack that's called Hyper Copenhagen Tests. There's just like a Slack domain that's entirely for us to test these things. So it's completely separated from everything that has to do with Hack Your Future. So there's no risk of accidentally posting anything on the real Hack Your
So you start like trying out Passport in Slack, see if that's a possibility.
Yeah, you can definitely use this one. Yeah, for sure, yeah.
I guess most of you are already accepted my invitation for the Slack. Yeah, you did. Yeah. I've changed your privileges to workplace owner, so I guess you will. Yeah, I guess you will be able to do everything.
Zoe, you're tasked with having a look at the Google Calendar API. So you need to figure out what does it take to write stuff to Google Calendar, what does it take to read stuff from Google Calendar, and then how does this entire thing about like someone accepts an invitee to an event, how does this work in the API, what can we do with it? This is a really important task because maybe we will start out building an application where we don't have any calendar data in our own application. Maybe we'll pull all the data out of Google Calendar to start with, just to have like something up and running quickly. Or maybe we will find out that we will have to duplicate the events in our own database all along, and then we have to figure out a way to synchronize it, and that's something I want you to look at as well, actually. So maybe yeah. And was there anyone else in that one? There was nobody else in that one. That's a Google Classroom API. So I think actually the two of you should be talking a little bit together, because it's like figuring out, should we go down the route of putting stuff in Google Calendar ourselves, or should we let that happen through Google Classroom API? Or if we use Google Classroom API, maybe we actually need to do both anyway. And is it worthwhile if we do that? So you would have to, I mean, the first part of your task would definitely be to just like go and create an account in Google Classroom. I tried doing that. It's just like using your Google account and setting up a classroom. You have to agree that you're setting up an organization, something like that. But it shouldn't be a problem. It's for free. But just try to use the product, try to create some data in there, figure out how everything works. Try to think really critical about, does this work with the application that we're building? Because what we're going to do is we're going to pull the data out of that application and present it in our own application. I already foresee a little bit of problems because there's not, in Google Classroom, there's not really a class schedule. It's not like you say, this time I'm teaching, this time I'm teaching. Instead of that, they have kind of like, this is homework, and this homework has a deadline, and then that homework comes into the calendar. So you kind of have to maybe do something about using homework for class modules or something like that. Intuitively, I don't like that, but maybe on the other hand, we'll get so much for free by using Google Classroom that we have a really nice admin interface and stuff like that. So I want you to try to think a little bit about whether we can do something feasible with that, and try to figure out, okay, so what's the best we can come up with Google Classroom? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll have to do a lot of stuff with the Google Calendar anyway, and maybe we'll find out that we have to have so one of the things that we want to see if we can do is maybe we can avoid having students and teachers in the database ourselves. We just have the student and teachers in Google Classroom. But maybe we find out, when you do the analysis, maybe we find out, okay, so for students, we still need to store this thing, and this thing, and this thing. So we will have to have like something in our local database anyway. And for teachers, we need to store this and this and that. And we have like a relation between them where we need to store something as well. And then suddenly we realize we have to duplicate all the stuff that we have in Google Classroom anyway. So in that case, it won't work. But if we can maybe think of a way to maybe simplify some things or do something in a different way, maybe we could use that, and we could have a really nice UI for administering classes and stuff like that completely for free. And also it also gives like a ability to send out emails and stuff like that to new students. So it's really easy for them to get started. That's also something that we could get for free. Yeah.
And yeah, I tried to sign in, but there is like two, like you want to sign it as a student or a teacher. So I just signed like a student.
You have to try everything. So if you need to create a new Gmail address or something like that, a fake Gmail address, do that. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you need, but test out the product, figure out how it works, and also that I didn't even mention that, but you also need to test out the API. So you need to put some data in there, some fake students, fake teachers, or whatever it takes to get some data in there, and then get an API up and running. Probably I'd look at the API early on, because you need to figure out if you have to get a token from them, an authentication token from them, and if it's something that you have to send an email to someone and they have to respond. It's something that can take time. Or if it's something that you can generate in their application, you can just have it right away. It's a good idea to start looking at that first, and then try out the application and figure out how it works, and then see what kind of data can we get out of the API. Is it sufficient to support what we're building?
Yeah, we forgot to Krishna.
No, I told Krishna that he was doing the React component as well.
I didn't hear.
Yeah.
What about Javed?
Javed, we'll worry about him next week.
But thanks for asking.
Yeah, because we can't include him until he comes.
So we already talked about this one, right? And Margot is not here today, so we got hold of him, and we talked about this one. Yeah, I think that's it.
We could maybe put that information on the page.
Yeah, so I mean, I have this Google document. It's kind of like our working document. My plan is to put all this stuff in the GitHub repository. So I'll do that after class today, and then I'll post it out on Slack so you can find all the information you need there. Because you know GitHub is the way we communicate tasks, right?
I just passed you.
Yeah.
It's already created.
I think we need to take the lunch break. We're only like 23 minutes late, so I hope there's some lunch out there still. When are we meeting again?
Half an hour?
Half an hour. So 2:55.